I'd like you to imagine that you and I have got into business together and it is going great. So we've got like 15 or 16 people on board. And one of the elements of keeping our stuff secure is that when we bring on new people, we want to have a really good password policy. And there's 3 basic elements about a password policy that are important. Here they are. Number 1, we want to have one. Have a password policy written down saying here are what the requirements are. 2, we want to educate the users on what that password policy is and how important it is to keep data safe, part of our user awareness training. And 3rd, we'd want to enforce it. We're not going to use the honor system. Please use this type of a password. We want to enforce it with technical controls. So as part of this password policy, let's take a look at some of the ingredients that we would want to have for a secure password policy. So one of the elements that we're going to want to have is the length of the password. And let's think together, what do you think an appropriate length would be? Now, longer is more secure, but also longer might be harder to remember. So as far as password length, we'd want to decide on the password length. Maybe it's 7 characters or 8 characters at a minimum. And that should be one of our elements in our password policy. Another element to include would be complexity. Now, with complexity, we're talking about upper and lower case, alphanumeric characters, special characters, things like that can make it really tough if somebody tries to do a brute force attack or a dictionary attack because the password is both long enough and it has a mixture of those combinations, alphanumeric, upper and lower case, and special characters. We'd also want to have as part of our policy age. You might ask, oh, Keith, what do you mean age? Well, one of those elements is we might want to have a max age. So if the password is more than 45 days old, that they're required to change it. Now, this is not really popular with the end users because they have to change their password. But if the password sits there unchanged for months or years, it becomes less and less secure as a result of all that exposure. And as an end user myself, I've discovered that there's a lot of ways we can get around having to remember multiple passwords. And one of those methods is if we're forced to change the password, why don't we just change it to the same password? So we go through the password change process, but we change it from password XYZ to password XYZ, and away we go. So another part of our policy would be to maintain a history of what the previous 5 or 10 passwords were so that the user cannot change their password to the exact same password again. So we'll add that here as history. And let's imagine we make the history remember the last 10 passwords. And if that history is set for their passwords, they won't be able to use one of their 10 previous passwords when they go to change their password. So another trick that users can use is they can change their password in rapid succession 11 times to get back to the original password because it's beyond the history. So another factor that we'd want in our password policy is a password of the minimum age. For example, a day, where you can't change a password more than 1 time a day, which would prevent a user from rapidly changing their password like 10 times in the same hour. So we could put that here on age. We could go ahead and use maximum age and also a minimum age. So maybe the max is 47 days and the minimum is 1 day. And for our password policy, we identified 3 things. Number 1, having one written down. 2, training our users on what it is. And 3rd, enforcing it with technical controls. So most network-based type of operating systems, including things like Active Directory, have the ability to go in and specify the requirements for your password policy. We can also enforce our technical controls for passwords on our network gear as well. And that would include things for users who are just trying to go through the network and they are authenticating as they go through, or individuals who are administrators who are connecting to our network devices. We can also enforce our password policies there as well. As an example, here's a Windows server. If we go to Server Manager here on the taskbar, and then if we click on Tools, and from the drop-down we go to Group Policy Management, through Active Directory we can enforce the policy for the password requirements. So if I expand our domain here, and then right-click on the default domain policy, and then click on Edit from the drop-down, here we can expand policies, expand Windows settings, and I'll maximize this to bring it full screen, and scooch this over just a little bit. And then we go to Security Settings. Here under the password policy, we can specify the details for our password policy that then can be technically enforced across the domain. And that would include things such as the history, the minimum and max age, the length, and also password complexity requirements. And for our networking devices, depending on the version of operating system they're using and the type of hardware they also have some controls for passwords. So if we scroll down here, we have very similar types of options with password composition regarding special characters, password length, password expiration. And if we scroll down this online documentation from Cisco, there's also some details regarding how that could be implemented on a system that supported those commands. And the key takeaway here is that we need to have a policy in place that's a written policy saying here's what we want to do. We need to make sure users are aware of it, and we also need to have technical controls that can enforce those policies, including complexity and password length and so forth. Now, a really popular and great option that we can train our users to use when creating a password that's secure is use a passphrase. Now you may say, Keith, what exactly is a passphrase? Take something that the user is comfortable or familiar with and put a couple of words together that don't normally go together. For example, let's say you have a user that really enjoys drinking water. That's their thing. So you'll say, great, okay, let's use water as part of your passphrase. Maybe a capital W, A-T-E-R, and then maybe they're also camera buffs, so use the word camera. And you could put the C in uppercase if you want to. So the passphrase could be water camera. And then you could add a few special characters like maybe 6783 or something else that's meaningful to that user. But by putting a combination of those terms together that the user can remember, it's going to be a lot easier for them to recall that password when they have to go ahead and use it. Now, another big challenge that comes up is remembering passwords and also not using the same password in multiple locations, which is a definite no-no. So to solve that, one great answer to that is to use a password manager, which we're going to take a look at in the very next video. So I'll see you there in just a moment. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.